I was born into a family that spoke in comparisons. From as early as I can remember, my worth was always measured against my older brother Adam. In our quiet, tree-lined suburban street, he was the golden child with the Midas touch, and I was the afterthought. "Your brother is so talented," my mother would say, glancing at my latest drawing with polite disinterest. "Look at Adam, he's going places." My father would chime in whenever my report card had one too many A-minuses instead of straight A's. Every praise directed at him became a dagger to me. Every time they said, "Your brother is the successful one," it echoed through the chambers of my heart, carving out a space where resentment would eventually take root. My earliest memory of this unspoken hierarchy goes back to kindergarten graduation. I was 5. Adam was 10. I remember clutching a hand-drawn certificate for most creative in my class, beaming as I scanned the audience for my parents. When I found them, they weren't even looking at me. They were turned toward Adam, who had casually mentioned he made the honor roll for the second year in a row. My mother's eyes sparkled with pride for him. My achievement, however childish, went unnoticed. I recall that sting even now, standing on a tiny stage in a paper graduation cap, feeling invisible as my parents rushed to congratulate Adam for a triumph 5-year-old me could barely understand. It was the first time I wondered if I would ever be enough. Growing up, Adam excelled at everything. He wasn't just good at math, he won regional competitions. He didn't just play soccer, he was the varsity captain scoring the winning goals. Every victory of his was paraded through our living room like a trophy on display. I learned to clap for him, to smile on cue for family photos, but inside each celebration felt like another crack in the foundation of my self-worth. While he was showered with applause, I was left in the shadows, clutching my quiet achievements: a novel I read in a week, a self-taught song on the piano, an A on a tough history project. They were things I was proud of, but they never seemed to matter. If Adam was the sun, I was a distant star, visible only after the sun had set and everyone else had gone to bed. My parents were not deliberately cruel. Perhaps that made it worse. They truly believed they were encouraging me by pointing to my brother as the example to follow. "He paved the way, you just have to follow in his footsteps," Dad would say whenever I struggled. But those footsteps felt impossible to fill. Adam's shoes were 2 sizes larger than mine, and every time I tried them on, I felt like a clown stumbling in oversized boots. One memory stands out clearly: a rainy afternoon in high school when I was 16. I'd just been elected vice president of the debate club and came home bursting with pride, clutching the certificate and a slice of cake my teacher had given me in celebration. When I walked into the living room, Dad was on the phone. From his tone, I could tell it was Adam. I waited quietly, dripping rainwater onto the floor. Mom glanced at me but raised a finger to her lips, signaling me to stay silent. When Dad finally hung up, his face was glowing. "Adam just got an internship at that big finance firm downtown," he announced proudly. My heart sank. The certificate in my hand suddenly felt like a trivial scrap of paper. I murmured a congratulations and slipped away to my room before they could see the tears threatening to spill. I never told them about my debate club victory. It paled in comparison to Adam's news. That night I ate the cake alone in my room, each bite tasting of disappointment. My youth taught me to keep my hurts private. I pushed myself to win every award at school, as if each ribbon or certificate could make them finally see me. Sometimes I did win and felt a spark of hope maybe this time they'd notice. But no. My victories were either eclipsed by Adam's or, worse, held up as proof that comparing me to him was working. "See, a little competition is good for you," Mom would say, claiming my success as a result of chasing Adam's spotlight rather than recognizing it as my own. During the holidays when Adam returned from college, the entire house revolved around him. My mother cooked his favorite dishes. My father even invited neighbors over just to brag about Adam's latest achievements. At dinner, Dad raised a toast to Adam's bright future. "He's going to be a great success, I just know it," he declared, then glanced at me with a perfunctory, "And you too, of course," accompanied by a fleeting, pitying smile. Those last words were hollow, an afterthought offered out of obligation. They shattered whatever hope I had, that for once I might share in the spotlight. I didn't start out hating my brother or resenting my parents. In fact, as a kid, I admired Adam almost as much as they did. But the world only needs one sun. Living in his orbit meant my own light was always dimmed. Over time, admiration warped into envy, and envy festered into bitterness. I remember lying in bed at 17, staring at the ceiling after another dinner dominated by Adam's praises. A dark thought crossed my mind. If Adam weren't here, maybe they'd finally see me. I immediately felt ashamed, horrified that I could even think such a thing. I didn't want anything bad to happen to him. I just yearned for a world where I wasn't eclipsed at every turn. By the end of high school, I knew I couldn't thrive in Adam's shadow. On the night of my graduation, as my parents gushed over Adam's new job offer without even asking about my college plans, I made a silent vow to myself. I would escape this family dynamic and build something of my own far away from them. Maybe then they'd finally look at me with the same pride they had for him, or maybe by that time I wouldn't need their approval at all. Back then, that promise filled me with hope. I had no idea the hardest trials were yet to come or how deeply my resolve would be tested. But in that moment, the vow was enough. It was the only thing that eased the sting of being second best, the belief that one day, somehow, I'd prove I was more than just the other son. Leaving home was supposed to be my escape. At 18, I packed my bags for college with the naive hope that distance would finally earn me a sliver of my parents' attention, or at least some peace. The day my parents dropped me off at a modest state university, a far cry from Adam's Ivy League campus, they treated it like a mundane errand. In the car, they spoke only of Adam's latest promotion. When we arrived, they gave me a brisk hug, a "study hard like your brother," and then they hurried off. Adam was coming over for dinner after all. As I watched their car disappear down the road, I understood that even striking out on my own wouldn't free me from his shadow. College was a lonely grind. While Adam's tuition had been fully covered by a college fund set up when he was born, I survived on scholarships, part-time jobs, and student loans. I shelved books in the library and scrubbed tables at a coffee shop to make ends meet. My parents rarely called. They visited only once in 4 years, and even that brief visit turned into another homage to Adam. Dad boasted to my dorm mates about Adam's fast-track career, while Mom reminded me not to fall behind your brother. By the time their car pulled away that afternoon, I was left feeling like a guest in my own life, present, but never really seen. Still, I refused to give up. If I could land a great job after graduation, maybe I'd finally earn a morsel of their respect. In senior year, I secured a coveted internship at a top marketing firm. Elated, I phoned home, hoping for once I'd hear pride in their voices. "That's nice, dear," Mom replied to my news. "But your brother just got engaged. Isn't that wonderful?" I congratulated her, my heart sinking, as my achievement was swept aside by yet another update from Adam's ever-shining life. I realized then that even my best accomplishments would always be eclipsed by his. After graduation, I moved to the city for an entry-level job that the internship had led to. It wasn't glamorous. I shared a cramped apartment with 3 roommates and ate cheap noodles for dinner, but it was a start. Not that it mattered to my parents. During infrequent calls, They'd politely ask how I was, then spend 20 minutes expounding on Adam's latest promotion or his wedding details. I learned to keep my own news short. There was no point in competing with the Golden Sun's spotlight. 2 years into that job, a recession hit. My company downsized, and I was among the ones let go. One afternoon, I was packing up my desk, and by nightfall I was staring at the ceiling of my apartment, wondering how I'd pay the next month's rent. Desperation does strange things to pride. A week after the layoff, with no prospects on the horizon and my savings nearly gone, I made the call I swore I'd never make. I reached out to my parents for help. My father answered. The moment I told him I'd lost my job, I heard the disapproval in his silence. He didn't offer comfort, only pointed questions that felt like accusations, wondering if I'd somehow brought this on myself. I bit back my shame and asked if I could come home for a little while, just until I got back on my feet. He fell quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was oddly distant. "That's not possible," he said. We gave the house to your brother. He and his wife live there now." I gripped the phone tighter. "You... what?" I managed to breathe. In a few blunt sentences, he laid it out. They had moved into a small condo by the lake, and Adam, the one with a real family and a real future, Dad said, had taken over the family home. It only made sense, he explained. Adam was the successful one, and he needed the space. "I'm sure you'll figure something out on your own," my father added. The implication hung in the air I always had. When that call ended, I sat in stunned silence. They had handed over my childhood home and effectively told me I wasn't welcome there. I was truly on my own. A few days later, when the landlord threatened eviction, I found myself driving back to that old neighborhood in a haze of hurt and disbelief. Some part of me still couldn't accept that I had nowhere to go. But as I turned onto my street, reality hit hard. A moving truck was parked in front of the house. Strangers were loading the last of my parents' furniture into it. I climbed out of my car just as my brother Adam emerged from the front door. He looked surprised to see me. "They're gone," he said, as if that answered everything. "Mom and Dad moved out this morning." He nodded toward the truck. "I'm settling in now." I stood there in the driveway, rain starting to drizzle, trying to find words. "I lost my job," I finally blurted, feeling a wave of humiliation. "I thought maybe I could stay here for a bit." Adam frowned, not meeting my eyes. "I don't think that's a good idea. We're turning your old room into a nursery." He shifted on his feet, then added in a softer tone, "Look, they told me you were doing fine on your own. If you need money for a motel or something, I can—" "No." I interrupted, a mix of anger and shame bubbling up. I could sense an apologetic note in his voice, but it only made me feel worse. It wasn't his apology to give, it was theirs. I glanced at the house, our house, and saw through the open door that the walls had already been stripped bare of family photos. My parents were inside doing a final sweep. They finally noticed me standing in the rain. My mother's eyes widened. "Oh, sweetheart." She started stepping out onto the porch. I held up a hand to stop her. There was nothing she could say that would make this right. "All of you made your choice. You gave away my home and left me with nothing," I said, my voice surprisingly calm as my heart pounded in my chest. My father opened his mouth to speak, but I continued coldly. "You gave him the house and you didn't even tell me." Rain started to spit from the sky, tapping on the driveway around us. My father stepped forward, palms up in a placating gesture. "We were going to, but things happened fast. We knew you were finding your own way, and Adam needed the space for his family. We assumed you'd understand." Understand. The world blurred through my tears. They truly didn't see it. The betrayal, the unfairness, the way they had cast me aside entirely. My mother reached out as if to touch my arm, but I pulled back. I was done. All the fight drained out of me. I turned to Adam, who stood awkwardly avoiding my eyes. Maybe in his own way he felt guilty, or maybe just uncomfortable. It didn't matter. "Don't worry," I told them, voice hollow. "I won't be your problem anymore." I walked back to my car as thunder rumbled overhead. No one tried to stop me. Not my parents, not my brother. I drove away from that house, my former home, for the last time, the dark clouds above finally breaking open to release a cold, hard rain. As the downpour blurred the windshield, I realized something inside me had shifted irrevocably. All my life I had been the one left behind, the one expected to fend for myself. Well, so be it. I would fend for myself. But I vowed then and there, with the steering wheel trembling in my grip, that I would never again ask them for a damn thing. If they saw me as insignificant, I would make myself so strong, so successful on my own terms, that I'd force them to see me. And when that day came, I wouldn't be begging at their doorstep, I'd be the one slamming doors in their faces. I spent the next weeks in a kind of numb haze. With no job, no family, and barely any money, I drifted through days and nights like a ghost. My car became my shelter. At night, I parked behind a 24-hour grocery store where I'd curl up under a threadbare blanket in the back seat as autumn's chill seeped in. A flickering street lamp was my only company as I shivered in the dark, the wind sneaking through a cracked window I couldn't afford to fix. In those bleak hours, loneliness wrapped around me as tightly as the blanket. I had never felt so completely and utterly alone. During the day, I roamed the city on foot. It was easier to keep warm moving. Libraries became my refuge. Free heat, free restrooms, and a place to sit among people without being chased away. I'd find a quiet corner between the shelves and try to job hunt using the public computers. Every application I sent felt like a message in a bottle cast into a vast, indifferent ocean. Most went unanswered. The few rejection emails I received were almost a comfort. At least they reminded me I still existed to someone somewhere, even if only as a file in an inbox. I avoided the few friends I had left, too proud and ashamed to let them see me like this. I told myself I didn't want their pity, but deep down, I feared their judgment. So I vanished quietly from their lives, changing my phone number and retreating deeper into isolation. It was a prison of my own making, with bars forged from pride and hurt. The anger, yes. It was still there, a faint ember glowing beneath the ash of my despair. In the first couple of nights in the car, I'd fan that ember, imagining scenarios of vindication, me landing a great job, showing up at a family gathering in a luxury car, proving to them all that I wasn't the loser they thought I was. In those fantasies, my father's eyes would widen with something like respect. My mother would finally gush with pride about me the way she did about Adam. But every morning I'd wake up, and the cold light of day would make such dreams evaporate, leaving only the bitter aftertaste. Reality was relentless. I was hungry down to my last few dollars. Dreams didn't put food in my stomach or get me a job. One crisp morning, I found myself outside the window of a cozy little cafe. Inside, families and couples sat chatting over steaming cups of coffee and plates of eggs and toast. The smell of bacon wafted out each time someone opened the door. My mouth watered and my stomach clenched painfully. I couldn't remember my last proper meal. Swallowing my pride, I walked in and asked if they had any odd jobs I could do for a meal. The manager shook his head and said, "I can't offer a job, but I can get you something to eat." He brought me a hot meal on the house. I ate it like a starved man trying to hold back tears. As I left, the waitress slipped an extra muffin into my pocket. It was the first kindness I'd felt in months. I ate that muffin alone in my car late that night, trying to fill more than just my stomach. Despite small mercies like that, each day felt heavier than the last. At night, under that flickering parking lot lamp, dark thoughts came creeping. I tried not to let them in, but in the silence and cold, it was hard to keep them at bay. I wondered if my life was always meant to be like this. Maybe my parents had been right all along. Maybe I really was the lesser son destined to fail. A voice in my head, sounding a lot like my father's, would whisper, "Adam never ended up like this." Another voice, sounding like mine as a child, would ask, "Why not just give up? Who would care?" On one particularly bleak night, I lay curled up in the back seat as a storm thundered overhead. Rain pelted the roof of the car, each drop a tiny hammer driving the nails of despair deeper into me. I stared at my phone's dark screen, fighting the urge to call my parents or even my brother. Not to beg, no, I was long past believing they would save me, but just to hear a familiar voice. I didn't call. Pride, stubbornness, or perhaps a last shred of self-respect wouldn't let me. Instead, I let the sound of the rain drown out the silent scream inside me. Hot tears slid down my face in the dark, and I didn't bother to wipe them. There was no one to see. I'm not sure how long I lived like that. Long enough to forget the taste of hope. Days and weeks blurred together. Each morning I'd awaken to the same question haunting me, what now? And each day I had no answer. I felt like I'd reached the bottom of a deep well, and no one was coming to pull me out. The idea of climbing out myself felt impossible. My arms were too weary, my spirit too crushed. One gray afternoon, I caught my reflection in a store window, a gaunt, hollow-eyed stranger. A frightening thought crossed my mind. Maybe it would be easier if I just disappeared. I stumbled back, heart pounding at how close I was to the edge. I needed to do something, anything, before I lost myself completely. But at that moment in time, I didn't have the faintest idea what something could be. I had no job, no money, no home, and seemingly no future. All I had was an angry spark buried somewhere in the ashes of my heart, and a stubborn will that had kept me alive this long. It wasn't much, but it was something. On the darkest of nights, sometimes a single spark can feel like a beacon. I clung to that faint ember of anger and resolve because it was all that separated me from surrender. Rock bottom is a strange place. In a way, it's liberating. When you have nothing left to lose, you start thinking about what you want to gain. Huddled in the dark, I finally admitted a truth to myself. I didn't just want to survive this. I wanted to rise up. Not tomorrow, not next week. At that moment, I didn't have the strength, but someday. Someday, I would drag myself out of this pit. And if I ever got the chance, I'd make sure no one ever had the power to shove me back down again. One cold dawn, I stepped out of my car and watched the sunrise burn through the gloom. I felt something I hadn't in a long time: resolve. Enough was enough. Rock bottom had tried to bury me, but I was still here. If I could survive with nothing, what might I achieve if I gave it everything? That very day I made the first hard choice of my new life. I sold my car. It wasn't much. My rusty old sedan fetched only a few $100s, but it was enough for a month's rent in a tiny room on the edge of the city and a few decent meals. Handing over the keys felt like closing the door on one chapter of my life. That car had carried me away from my family home and sheltered me in my darkest hours, but it also kept me tied to a wandering, stagnant existence. With it gone, I had no option but to move forward on my own 2 feet. With a roof, however humble, over my head and regular access to a shower and clean clothes, I attacked the problem of employment with renewed vigor. Every morning I scoured job listings at the public library and marched into any place that seemed even remotely promising. Dozens of applications and interviews later, I finally caught a break. A small advertising agency, really just a two-man startup looking for an assistant, decided to take a chance on me. Maybe it was the college degree I had nearly forgotten I possessed, or maybe they saw the fire in my eyes when I practically begged them for the job. Either way, I was in. The pay was peanuts, barely above minimum wage, but I poured myself into that job as if I were making six figures. I arrived early, stayed late, and treated every task as a chance to learn. Years of feeling invisible had sharpened my observation skills. I soaked up every lesson on winning clients and solving problems. I taught myself new skills during lunch hours and quickly proved my worth. Within 6 months, I was handling small client accounts. Within a year, I earned a promotion from assistant to junior ad executive. The first successful campaign I ran on my own boosted a client's sales dramatically. It was all the proof I needed that I wasn't the failure I'd been told I was. I was capable. All I'd ever needed was a chance. Over the next few years, I rose quickly. My bosses trusted me with bigger projects, and I delivered every time. Clients began to request me by name. By my 3rd year, I was valued enough to become a junior partner at the agency. By the 4th, I had the confidence and savings to strike out on my own. When I finally opened my own marketing consultancy, I had a couple of loyal clients ready to follow me, a small investment from a mentor, and more determination than ever. Building my own business was both terrifying and thrilling. In the early days, I was the CEO, the accountant, the copywriter, and the janitor all at once. I poured in 12 and 14-hour days without complaint. Every new contract I won, every positive result I delivered, felt like a step out of the shadow that had consumed me for so long, and I was good at it. My client list grew quickly through word of mouth, my campaigns delivering real results for small and mid-sized companies that the big agencies often ignored. Within 2 years, I was hiring employees of my own talented, hungry young people who reminded me of myself. As my company expanded, so did my horizons. I began branching out, investing the profits wisely. Perhaps remembering the ache of losing my home drew me to real estate as my next venture. With some of my earnings, I bought a rundown duplex, fixed it up, and rented it out. Holding those keys, owning something that couldn't be taken from me, was indescribably satisfying. It was addictive, too. I sold that place for a profit and bought 2 more properties. Soon I had a small side business as a property investor, steadily growing my assets. Through an old acquaintance, I heard my parents assumed I was still struggling. If I'd done anything noteworthy, they figured they would have heard about it. I preferred it that way. Let them think I was still lost, so the surprise would be that much sweeter when I finally revealed the life I'd built. That day drew closer with every promotion, every new client, every property deed in my portfolio. I went from living in a tiny rented room to a respectable condo and eventually to a penthouse apartment with a skyline view. I remember moving into that penthouse and looking down at the city lights, marveling at how far I'd come from the shivering man in the car. But even in moments of triumph, I never allowed myself to forget why I was doing this. By the time I was in my early 30s, I had built something that even my parents would have had to call success. My marketing company was thriving, my investments were multiplying, and my net worth had soared beyond what I ever imagined possible when I was scrounging for coins to buy a sandwich. I had, in effect, built my own quiet empire piece by piece, brick by brick, without an ounce of support or encouragement from the people who claimed to love me. And now I finally had the means to do what I'd quietly dreamed of doing for years, to turn the tables. They had once left me on the outside, looking in, cast me out of the only home I knew. With the power and resources I had amassed, I could finally return the favor. My opportunity for justice was on the horizon. All I had to do was seize it. I never forgot the day I found my opening. By my early 30s, I had the resources to dig quietly into my family's affairs, and what I discovered was almost poetic. The brother my parents had bet everything on was struggling. The booming economy that had once favored him took a turn, and Adam, so lauded for his success, had overextended himself. Through discreet inquiries and a hired investigator, I learned that the family house, the very one I'd been cast out of, had been remortgaged to fund some ambitious business venture of his. That venture was now failing. Payments were behind, notices of default were piling up. The house was on the brink of foreclosure. I remember sitting in my corner office, high above the city, reading the report on Adam's finances, as if it were a script written just for me. Every line confirmed what I suspected: my brother's success was not invincible. He had made mistakes, and now those mistakes were coming home to roost. I felt a cold, calm resolve settle over me. This was it, the chance to balance the scales. Revenge, I realized, is best conducted in silence and precision. I didn't gloat, I didn't rant or rave. I simply got to work. Step one was to ensure no one connected this unfolding disaster to me. I set up a shell company, an unremarkable LLC named after an obscure piece of Greek mythology, and through it I approached the bank holding the mortgage on the house. Money talks and a substantial cash offer made it easy to purchase the delinquent loan outright. In a matter of weeks, my shell company held the note to my parents' beloved house. They had no idea, of course. To them, I was still a ghost, a non-entity somewhere far away. They would have seen a different corporate name on the notices, some random bank or entity, never suspecting that I was behind it. Step two was to tighten the noose. I bided my time just enough to avoid arousing suspicion. An anonymous notice here, a legal letter there, coldly informing them that foreclosure proceedings were moving forward due to the unpaid debt. I imagined my parents and brother huddling around their kitchen table, opening those envelopes with dread. Perhaps they argued, perhaps they panicked. I wouldn't know. I was not privy to those conversations. I kept my distance, preferring to watch the drama unfold through second-hand updates from my investigator and the inevitable paper trail. The house I'd grown up in, the one they'd given to Adam while I shivered in a parking lot, was about to slip through their fingers. There were moments late at night when a small voice wondered if I was going too far. After all, they were my family. But then I'd recall that rainy day I begged for help and was turned away, my father's voice insisting he's the successful one, as I stood drenched and discarded. Any flicker of pity I felt was drowned by the tidal wave of pain I'd carried for years. They had made their choice. Now I was making mine. Step 3 was to make the fall as swift and final as possible. Once the legal foreclosure was underway, I expedited the timeline. I had lawyers, faceless people they'd never suspect were connected to me. Ensure that every requirement was met to the letter of the law, pushing aside any delay tactics Adam's own attorneys might try. With the stroke of a judge's pen, the house was repossessed by my company. Just like that, my brother and parents went from homeowners to squatters on property that no longer belonged to them. It was almost too easy. Of course, foreclosure is a process, and they were given a formal eviction date by which to vacate. I doubt they believed it was truly happening until the final notice arrived. People like them, people who had always enjoyed stability and privilege, probably thought something or someone would save them at the last minute. Perhaps they expected a bank to renegotiate or a friend to loan them money. Perhaps even a miracle. But not this time. I was the unseen hand, ensuring that no help would come. Every avenue they might have had for a reprieve was quietly closed off, either bought out, called in, or coldly refused. On the morning of the eviction, I was up before dawn. I stood by my window watching the sky lighten and thought of another dawn years ago when I vowed to change my fate. Now I had the power to change theirs. Step 4 was the final execution of my plan. I arranged for a moving company truck to be at my parents', now my address, first thing in the morning. I paid them generously and instructed them to be polite but efficient, to help the residents pack up and move out immediately. Legally, I could have sent sheriff's deputies to enforce the eviction, but I wanted this to feel less like a legal procedure and more like a personal delivery of fate. A moving truck arriving unannounced would send a clear message of finality. I didn't ride in the truck, of course. I followed in my own black sedan and parked down the street where I could watch the front of the house without immediately being seen. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, adrenaline coursing through me. This was the culmination of years of quiet effort, of rage transmuted into strategy. Part of me still couldn't believe I was actually doing it. Another part of me was grimly elated. From my vantage point, I saw the movers knock on the door at 8:00 a.m. sharp. I saw my father, bewildered and disheveled, open the door. The movers courteously handed him paperwork, the eviction order and an offer to pack their belongings. Confusion turned to distress on his face. He disappeared inside, and moments later, I glimpsed my mother in the doorway, her hand over her mouth in shock. A few minutes after my brother's figure appeared, gesturing angrily, probably demanding answers the movers didn't have. It was time for me to step in. I stepped out of my car and began walking toward that house, my house now, feeling an eerie calm wash over me. The morning air was cool, carrying the scent of wet leaves from the lawns. Each step felt heavy. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind, but reality was far more potent. By the time I reached the end of the driveway, my family had noticed the lone figure approaching. It was time to collect the debt they owed me, a debt of recognition, of justice, and yes, of revenge. The stage was set for our final confrontation, and I was ready to deliver the lines I had waited a lifetime to say. I stopped a few paces from the porch, my heart thundering in my ears, and finally met their eyes. My father stood on the porch, clutching the eviction papers, his face ashen. My mother was beside him, eyes red and overflowing with tears. Adam hovered behind them, fists clenched in anger. For a moment, none of us spoke. We just stared, the silence heavy with disbelief and a dozen unspoken memories. It was my mother who found her voice first. Is that you?" she whispered, as if unsure whether I was flesh or apparition. In that instant, I realized how much I must have changed. The scrawny, desperate young man they'd last seen was gone. I stood before them in a tailored coat, confidence in my stance, an aura of authority about me that even I could feel. I almost answered with a sarcastic remark, but seeing my mother's trembling form, I simply nodded. "What? What is happening?" she cried, gesturing to the moving truck and the strangers carrying boxes of our life away. "They said we have to leave. We're being evicted." My father's eyes narrowed, transitioning from shock to suspicion as he looked at me. "Do you know anything about this?" he asked hoarsely. There was a desperate edge to his voice, as if he was grasping for any explanation that made sense. "Yes," I finally replied, my voice steady. "I'm the one who took the house." My mother let out a soft wail and sank onto the porch step as if her legs had given out. One of the movers paused, unsure whether to continue carrying a box past her. She waved him on absent-mindedly, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "How could you do this to us?" she sobbed, looking up at me with an expression that might have shattered my heart years ago. "We're your family." Family. The word hung in the air, almost absurd in its presumptuousness. I felt a bitter laugh bubble up, and this time I didn't entirely suppress it. It escaped as a short, sharp sound. "Family," I repeated. "Now you remember I'm family." Where was that sentiment when I was cast out? When I begged you for a place to stay and you turned me away? My father flinched as if I'd struck him. He said nothing, lips pressed into a thin line. My mother covered her face, sobbing harder. Adam stepped forward, hands balled into fists at his sides. "So, this is your revenge," he muttered bitterly. "Throwing us out to prove a point? You're pathetic." I felt a cold fury settle over me. I turned my gaze to my brother, the golden sun, standing in the ruins of his own golden life. "Pathetic," I repeated softly. "Let's talk about pathetic Adam. I quietly built my own empire while you were squandering everything handed to you." I gestured around at the half-packed boxes, the moving truck ready to cart away their belongings. "You're being evicted from a house you never earned by the brother you never thought twice about. Tell me which one of us is pathetic now." Adam's face contorted as if I had slapped him. For a moment I thought he might swing at me, but he didn't. His shoulders sagged, instead, defeat creeping into his eyes despite the rage. He had no retort because every word I spoke was true. My mother was openly weeping now, her shoulders shaking. "Please," she whispered. "We have nowhere to go. This is our home." Her plea hung in the air, a final pitiful attempt to tug at my heart. I felt a tightness in my chest, but I steeled myself. I thought of the nights I spent in a freezing car, of the humiliation and hunger and loneliness. "It stopped being your home the day you gave it away," I replied, my voice cold. "You gave it to him, remember, you made your choice." Silence fell. In the distance, a car door slammed, neighbors watching, but keeping a safe distance from the unfolding drama. My father's shoulders slumped in defeat. My mother covered her face, her sobs quieting to exhausted whimpers. Adam looked at me with a mixture of hatred and something else, perhaps regret or shame, it was hard to tell. And at that point, I didn't care. The movers had finished their work. The foreman approached me hesitantly with a clipboard to sign off that the job was done. I took the pen, my hand remarkably steady, and scribbled my name. The house was now empty, save for the echoes of a family that no longer had any claim to it. "So that's it," my brother muttered under his breath. "You're kicking us out to get your revenge. You think this makes you win?" I met his glare with a cold stare. "This isn't about winning or gloating," I replied. "It's about justice. All my life you were the successful one and I was nothing. I did this to show you that I mattered." No one replied. What could they say? The truth was laid bare and it stung every one of us. I took a step back, suddenly feeling unbelievably weary. The adrenaline was ebbing, leaving behind a profound emptiness that gnawed at the edges of my resolve. "The truck will take your things wherever you want," I said, addressing my parents, who were avoiding my eyes, now staring numbly at the floorboards of the porch. "I've paid for a storage unit for 3 months. After that, it's up to you." The gesture was more mercy than I'd planned to give, but perhaps some part of me wasn't completely made of stone. They gave no reply. They simply looked so much smaller now, shrunken by loss and regret. With nothing left to say, I turned and walked away down the driveway. Behind me, my mother sobbed softly, and my father murmured something to console her. Adam's eyes burned into my back, but he stayed silent. I felt a fleeting impulse to offer a goodbye or some final explanation, but I let it pass. I got into my car, and pulled away without looking back, leaving them standing together on the porch of a house that was no longer theirs in a life that had finally irrevocably collided with the consequences of our shared past. The day after the eviction felt eerily quiet. For the first time in years, I woke up with the main goal of my life accomplished. I had done what I set out to do. I had taken back what was denied to me and forced my family to confront the pain they'd caused. By all rights, I should have felt triumphant. And yet, as I stood in the living room of that now empty house, all I felt was a heavy, lingering silence. Sunlight filtered through the dusty windows, illuminating patches on the hardwood floor where rugs and furniture had sat for decades. My footsteps echoed as I wandered through the barren rooms. This was the house where I had grown up, the hallway where my mother used to tape up our crayon drawings, the kitchen where my father lectured me about being more like Adam, the stairs I used to sulk up when I felt invisible. Ghosts of memories clung to every corner. Now the house was devoid of life, reduced to walls and emptiness. In a way, it mirrored exactly how I felt inside. I paused in the doorway of what used to be my bedroom. The wallpaper was faded, but I could still make out the faint outlines of the star stickers I'd put on the ceiling as a child. I remembered lying in my little bed, staring up at those glow-in-the-dark constellations, dreaming about being seen, about being special. A bitter smile tugged at my lips. In the end, I had become something far beyond what that little boy could imagine. But the cost of becoming it was written in the emptiness of this house and the estrangement of the people who once lived here. Justice had been served, at least that's what I told myself. My family had finally tasted the bitterness of loss and rejection that I knew so well. In the weeks that followed, I learned my parents and brother moved into a small rented apartment across town. It was all they could afford after the financial ruin. My father in his 60s even took a part-time job to make ends meet. My mother sank into a depression and seldom left home. Adam quietly left town to find work elsewhere, too ashamed or angry to stay. I thought I would feel nothing but satisfaction at these outcomes. And yes, a part of me was grimly pleased to know they were tasting the bitterness of loss. But the triumph I anticipated was hollow. Deep down, I had hoped they might finally admit they were wrong about me. Instead, they were too consumed by their own pain. Not one of them said, "We were wrong," or "We're sorry." In seeking justice, I realized I had also sealed off any chance of reconciliation. Revenge had given me power over their lives, but it could never force them to love me or undo the past. I left the house that afternoon, locking the door behind me. I had no intention of living there or keeping it. I only wanted to reclaim it for the symbolic victory. I arranged to put it on the market soon after. In a practical sense, my revenge was complete and successful. I regained the family home, only to remove my family from it, just as they had once removed me. I thought that would bring me peace. In some ways, it did. I won't lie, I felt a vindication, a settling of the scales. That young man who had wept in his car while his family forgot him deserved to be heard, and he had been. I made sure of it. There was a justice in seeing my father's pride broken, my brother's arrogance humbled. In that sense, I have no doubt that they understood finally that I was not the failure they thought I was. Whether they admitted it or not, they saw what I'd become, and they knew I had beaten them at their own game. There was a cold, dark gratification in that. But there was also a cost I hadn't fully grasped until I stood in those empty rooms. I looked around and saw not just my childhood home stripped bare, but the final stripping away of any ties I had to my family. I had orchestrated their downfall, and in doing so, I'd severed us completely. I was truly free of them now, free in a way that felt both liberating and lonesome. In the days following, I sometimes caught myself picking up my phone as if to call my mother out of old habit, before I remembered there was no longer any pretense of familial warmth between us. Once or twice out of habit, I almost reached out to them, forgetting that door was closed. I even found myself scrolling through a few old voicemails and texts from the mundane messages I'd saved without really knowing why. Now they felt like relics from another life. I'm not sure what I expected after finally getting revenge. Perhaps I thought I'd feel lighter, unburdened. In a sense, I did feel a certain release, like I could finally stop proving myself to people who would never appreciate me. But I also felt an ache that I can only describe as grief, not for the loss of my parents and brother, as they were, truthfully, I'd lost them long ago, but for the loss of the hope that one day we might reconcile, that they might change. I realized that even as I executed my revenge, a small part of me had still been that child, yearning for approval. That part died the moment I walked away from them on the porch. In the end, I gained a house wealth and a sense of justice. I lost a family that had already lost me long before, and whatever remaining innocence I had about the situation. They say if you seek revenge, you should dig 2 graves. I hadn't understood that until now. I may have buried my old hurt, but I also buried any gentler path forward. I have to accept the consequences of what I'd done. Justice in my case came at the price of finality. They could never again call me begging for help, nor would I ever again reach out for the love they withheld. We were done, our story written to the end in bitter ink, and despite the sorrow that accompanied my dark triumph, I can't say I would undo it. The die had been cast long ago. I simply carried it to its bitter conclusion. Time has passed since that fateful day, and I am left with a life that is entirely my own. In many ways, I got exactly what I wanted: independence, success, and the final word in the story of my family. I wish I could tell you that it's a perfect happy ending, that I walk around every day glowing with satisfaction. But life is more complicated than that. Yes, I am successful. Yes, I proved my point. And yes, there's a part of me that feels a grim sense of justice was achieved. But there's also a part of me that will always mourn the fact that justice was even necessary in the first place. Sometimes I catch myself looking at old family photos. I don't display them, but I have a box of them tucked away. There's one of a Christmas from long ago, my father laughing in his armchair, my mother by the tree, Adam and I on the floor ripping open presents. We look so happy, so normal. I stare at the boy I was in that photograph, and I wonder if he knew what was coming. Would he have believed it? Would he have done anything differently? Hard to say. The seeds of our future were planted in that very moment, in the way my parents fawned over Adam's new toy, while I was urged to see what Adam got me, because even my gift was something my brother picked out. I didn't notice it then, but I feel it now through time, that quiet heartbreak. I often think about the concept of success and the lengths we go to achieve recognition. My parents believed success was a competition, a comparison with winners and losers. In the end, none of us really won. My brother lost his home and his pride. My parents lost both their sons in different ways, one through humiliation, the other through estrangement. And I lost the remaining shards of my innocence and any chance for a normal relationship with them. If there's one thing I truly gained, it's freedom from their expectations, from their dismissals. I no longer need their approval or dread their judgment. For the first time, I'm living for myself and not to prove a point to them. There's power in that, a kind of quiet peace that sits alongside the sadness. Some nights I still lie awake thinking about whether I became the villain in this story, or just the inevitable product of a villainous situation. It's a morally gray place to be caught between feeling justified and feeling guilty. I imagine there will be people who hear my story and think I went too far, that I should have been the bigger person, or simply moved on without seeking revenge. There will be others who understand exactly why I did what I did, who might have done the same in my shoes. Honestly, I can't blame anyone for their reaction. This tale isn't a comfortable one. It forces you to ask, what would you do if years of neglect and hurt were finally in your hands, to either forgive or punish? For me, forgiveness was a door that closed the day they turned me away. All that remained was the path I took. Right or wrong, that path has brought me here telling this story. I share it not to glorify what I did, but to lay bare the truth of it. It's a cautionary tale, perhaps, about what unchecked favoritism and neglect can do to a person, and about how the hunger for validation can darken into vengeance. Now, standing on the other side of all this, I'm left with questions as much as answers. Do I feel vindicated? Do I feel whole? I'm honestly not sure. I have learned that success built on spite can still feel empty if you have no one to share it with. I built an empire in silence, but in the silence that follows revenge, I sometimes wonder what it was all for. I'm sharing these words as a kind of confession and a conversation. Maybe my story speaks to something you've felt or witnessed. Perhaps you know what it's like to live in someone's shadow, to be underestimated or cast aside. Maybe you've dreamed of setting the record straight in a dramatic way. Or maybe you believe deeply in forgiveness and second chances and think, I lost mine. Whatever your take, I truly want to know. Was I justified in what I did? Do you think there was another way? What would you have done if you were in my position? It's easy to say you'd do things differently, and perhaps you would. Perhaps you have a bigger heart than I did at the end. If you have thoughts or even your own stories of family injustice, I invite you to share them with me. I'm here to listen too, now that I've finished telling mine. My journey has been a dark and complex one, and it has taught me that life is rarely black and white. It's full of pain and beauty, justice and regret, often intertwined. All I know is that I made the choices I felt I had to make to survive and reclaim my dignity. The outcome is a life where I stand on my own 2 feet, unshadowed by anyone. There's peace in that, even if it's a peace tinged with loneliness at times. Thank you for listening to my story, for letting me unburden these secrets and sorrows. If my tale moved you or made you think, please feel free to comment or share it. Perhaps it might reach someone out there who has felt the same kind of hurt. And maybe, just maybe, it will remind parents to cherish all their children and those in pain to know they're not alone. In the end, my silent revenge is complete, and this confession is all that remains. The rest I leave to your judgment. Now I ask you, what do you think about it all?